Recording. All right, as a reminder, please put your name on the attendees list. I will do so myself. And I don't see any new faces, so release planning and updates.
We're getting ready to ship a patch release of the lifecycle to fix an issue with caching for Buildpacks on the 06 Buildpack API. So far, not many that we can see, or any Buildpacks that are out there, at least on the suggested builders, have upgraded. So we think the impact is minimal, but we're getting a fix out as soon as we can.
And on the platform side, we've got a release in 2 weeks, so we're just chugging along.
Awesome. Any other sub-team updates? Then next thing is our weekly RFC review. Hold on while I share my screen. All right. Oh, so this is sorted. So no sub-team RFCs here, no drafts, and yeah. So add build right flag for layers. This is from Sam. I've been talking about this a lot. Sam, anything you need to get this going forward? Seems like we've gotten approval from Joe.
I haven't seen the reviews that Kevin's left today. I'll take a look later.
Cool. I'm going to throw all the rest of the core team on this one too. Oh, I should go back like that. Cool. Add bomb to layer content metadata. Where are we with this one?
I think I addressed all the comments from Emily and just waiting for her to take a look again.
Sorry, I thought I had already approved it again. Let me go back and look at it now.
Cool. Looks like Terrence wasn't on there either. Just added him. Cool. So almost there on this one. Allowed setting default command arguments that can be overridden by the user. This one was the more controversial one. Looking at Emily.
I feel like we just had this conversation, but I guess it was a week ago. Yes, we need a controversial RFC. This came up again today about how the way we handle shell things are weird. I wonder if we could put something on the agenda for later, because Sam, I think part of our plan that we had sort of verbally discussed and still needs to be captured would involve removing support for profile scripts. And there's some feedback that the exec-d interface is maybe not the friendliest for people. So I think that might be worth talking about today.
And put that in the agenda.
Yeah.
All right. Oh gosh, where were we? Recommend for different build runtime user IDs. I think this one was going pretty well. It's missing an approval from me. But I thought I approved this one. Guess not. Oh no, this already passed. Sorry, missed the FCP label. Terrence was going to is a shepherd for this one, and Terrence, are you there?
Yeah.
Do you want to take this one through?
Sure.
Past FCP, cool, thank you. Disambiguate layer metadata files from app metadata.
I updated the alternatives with all the ones that were proposed. I think like this one came at the top, and there are 4 other alternatives if people want to take a look at that.
Cool. So just waiting for more review of this one. Nothing
Yeah.
specific. Cool. Guidelines for accepting component level contributions is mine. I thought at one point I went through and addressed a bunch of feedback. Was there more feedback I was supposed to add to this? Looking at Joe and Terrence. There's something about Linux Foundation, but it didn't seem like all the comments were resolved. I thought maybe somebody said something last time, but then I thought it was left as a comment, but it wasn't.
I think you accepted a thing I suggested.
Cool.
Is what happened. No, I probably just need to look over it with all the changes in. But there's something probably blocking on my end.
Yeah, same here.
Sounds great.
Speaking of forgetting things that we talked about last time, Natalie had brought up the great idea that we should perhaps have a note taker for these meetings. And I kindly volunteered to do it. So I'd forgotten to mention at the beginning of the meeting that we had had that conversation, but I wonder if we should start taking better notes during working groups, because I think we are all less good at remembering things than we think we are.
People don't actually go back and watch the recordings every time if they want to, you know, that makes sense. Did you say somebody volunteered?
Natalie volunteered to do it today. If you're still amenable to do that, Natalie did not volunteer to do it forever. I think we would be asking for a volunteer at the beginning of meetings.
Sounds good. You need an RFC for that. Just kidding. All right, I guess Natalie, definitely feel free to take notes in the, I think it should just go into the same doc, right? I don't think we need like different docs for that. You know, cool. Last one is RFC issue generation. This is in FCP. FCP ended a long time ago. And Javier, what's up on this one? Do we have Javier today? We do
He's
not.
out today.
Cool. So we'll ask him about this next time. Yes, Terrence, you're the shepherd for this one. Maybe you could work with Javier. Seems like he was, oh, Javier volunteered to help with the issue creation from last time. Yeah. So I don't know, you two figure it out.
It's funny that we can't merge the issue generation RFC because we haven't generated issues.
yeah. That's pretty good. All right, that concludes our RFC review. Life without Bash, first thing.
So we had discussed maybe totally removing the idea of Bash as a first class concept in the lifecycle and different types of processes, and instead move to every process being direct. And if you want Bash in your process, you have to explicitly say Bash in your command. This simplifies a lot of things in the lifecycle and would give us a chance to clean up some of the weirder things we've done to like support arguments for Bash scripts, because there's now a great way to randomly append arguments into a script and evaluate them correctly, but know when certain things are not supposed to be, certain quotes are supposed to be preserved, stuff like that. The usage for some of the features that are most useful, like appending arguments, are weird in Bash. But if we moved to having Buildpack authors be explicit about how and when they use Bash, things would be less surprising and authors should have more control.
Would that mean that variable, what do you call it, interpolation wouldn't happen? Like if you put like $port in your command,
Yes, if your command was, Java jar spring port equals dollar port, whatever, it wouldn't happen by default. But what you
You'd
could
have to do bash
do
dash
is
C or
a
something.
bash C and then have that in a script.
Oh, that's such a rough experience. Because that is like, it's pretty common for like tools, as port in particular, where like they won't read it from a file or the N bar, and like you've got to pass it in on a command line kind of thing.
There's a tool that's on many Unix systems called nsubster. It has a standard way of doing interpolation of just variable interpolation that's generally bash compatible. If we wanted to reduce our dependency on bash, but still allow a mode where you don't have to change your command, but you can still do variable references. So you could have a flag you can turn on for your process that's like substitute, and then it would do substitutions. But it would depend on nsubster existing there. There's also Go libraries that'll do that too, that implement the same logic. So we wouldn't even have to depend on the Unix thing. We could just do the variable substitution ourselves.
Wouldn't the thing about the Go libraries, you'd have to still evaluate them at the container runtime for port. So like that's still some extra process to do the interpolation at the beginning of writing your process command.
We're not talking about getting rid of the launcher, though.
Oh, okay, so then you would have the launcher do the interpolation?
Yeah.
Okay.
The launcher does that right now, right? Just taking out the bash part.
I don't think the launcher would interpolate values for you in this world, right? If your command had $port in it, we're not going to interpolate it. Your command would have to be bash C, a command that has $port in it, and that would just work. And then if someone wanted to set the port, you could just set the environment variable, but you couldn't pass a new flag that has the environment variable in it.
I was saying in cases where you don't want to bash C, right, where you just want to specify a command and you want an environment variable to be in there, we could add an extra flag to the process, like substitute, and then we could use our own substitution logic. That kind of substitution for variables is actually fairly standardized, just like a Unix command called nsubster that'll do it, but there are Go libraries that do the same thing, and so we could still provide just that functionality optionally without having to even rely on a shell, which is nice. So you could write a build pack that isn't shell specific, but still has that functionality, which is maybe a little even better than it is today in some ways.
That would be useful because Cube also provides something similar where you can specify environment variables and you can directly use them in your commands and args. So even if you get rid of bash, that variables interpolation would still be useful.
If in Cube you have to opt into that behavior, or is it just always on?
Always on.
Maybe we should do that instead as well. I do think, because most end users are the ones who would be passing these things that need to get interpolated, and we might not want to make them have to be aware of whether the build pack opted into this mode or not.
Sam, could you link documentation for that? I'm curious how that works.
Yeah, I can.
By the way, I'm doing my best to capture these notes, but sometimes I'm feeling a little shaky that I'm doing it accurately. So feel free to make any edits.
Thank you for trying.
Yeah, so like, my concern, I don't really care about bash itself. It's the user experience I care about. And as it relates, especially to variables and like having to add things like bash C, that is going to trip basically everybody who writes a build pack, trip them up. And I assume this is also related to profile D and stuff like that, right? Which, like I'm happy to keep discussing that. Like we talked about using exec D instead, but maybe there's also another path there where it's not bash, but we can still, well, I guess what kind of script do you put in your profile D if you're not using bash? But I think there's definitely a trade-off here in user experience, and that's the thing I care about, not bash itself.
I think this was also something that bit me today, where I was using direct equals false, and like the variable interpretation was like being done in cases where it didn't need to be, and that was causing it to get stripped of like required quotes. So I was trying to pass in a JSON dictionary using single quotes, and I was stripping all the double quotes inside the JSON object, which was not what I expected. And then because this only like happens when direct equals false is set, I had to set it back to I had to set it back to direct equals true, and then as a consequence, I had to move all of my profile D scripts to execd and change my entry point scripts, which were using environment variables directly, like the process commands and args, which are using environment variables directly. I had to convert that into another bash entry point script, and that was a huge pain.
Seems like we're all aligned on the same goal, which is better user experience for, putting code in different places, writing start commands. And if we can achieve a good user experience there that doesn't involve a hard dependency on bash, then to me, that's like a big win-win. But I definitely agree that we can't just rip bash out and say you're on your own. It has to be a well thought out thing, right? I really like, Sam, what you linked about how Kate's does. I had no idea, it's not exactly the same environment variable format as bash that uses parentheses instead of curlies, but I had no idea. And it makes so much sense that they would want to do that to improve their user experience for solving what's the same problem, essentially providing commands at runtime.
Be interesting if Docker could do something like this too, right? Then in some ways it wouldn't even need to be a launcher concern. But I guess like if you're doing this in the Kate's case, like is this actually a problem for Buildpack users in that Kate's will evaluate these environment variables before running the command, but maybe they're referring to environment variables that are set in files that are added to the environment by the launcher?
Kate's only evaluates the environment variables which are passed in the spec itself. It doesn't evaluate everything as far as I know. So it won't evaluate the things that are inside the container. It will do the evaluation before the container is launched.
Yep, just
Got
the
it.
config file is evaluated.
But if you use that notation and something's not in that list, does it not interpolate it, or does it interpolate nothing into there?
I have not tried that. I guess you can try it out, but I've never tried all the edge cases around this, like what happens when XYZ.
Back to the profile scripts for a minute, leaving aside the user provided .profile script, because I feel like that's a bigger conversation. Do we feel like asking Buildpack authors to switch from profile scripts to execd, to the execd interface is too much of a burden for Buildpack authors?
I don't know the implications entirely.
Like if your Buildpack is contributing a profile script, you would instead need to replace it with a binary that returns the environment variables in the format.
It wouldn't have to be a binary, right? It could still be a shell script. It would just, have to be an executable shell script, and
That's
changes
what I
out
ended up doing to quickly convert from profile D to execd. But a couple of issues there was, one, the file descriptor, like having to test that. Like previously, I could just I could more easily test those profile D scripts even if I'm not using it directly with the like Buildpack test or something. Like I could just verify those bash scripts by running it locally. But with execd, I need to first create a file descriptor, check what the outputs are, like when I'm just developing the profile D or exec-D script, not when I'm developing the buildpack itself. So that's another layer of um, like you need to then figure out a way to test the exec-D system that's working correctly.
Can you explain that a little more? So in the profile case, you can access environment variables because you're sourcing the profile script and they're set in the current environment. In the exec-D case, you should just be able to set the environment variables, make sure they're exported, and you should see them in the exec-D when you're testing it. What was the difference in testing?
No, it's when I'm developing the script. So like when I'm like, it's just random bash scripts, right? So, and I can just set those variables and test what the output was. Whereas for exec-D, I first have to I mean, it's just one step, but it's like creating a file descriptor and then checking the values that were outputted to the file descriptor were correct or not. I guess it doesn't really matter when you're not using bash to create exec-D. If you're using like Go or something, which is just what Go uses, it and you have like a proper test suite set up, it doesn't really matter there. But if you're creating buildpacks in bash, it is a bit janky.
Got it. Joe's linking some examples here. Are these exec
It's not that I care. XCD. No, these are these are existing profile scripts that I use. And this is not like I don't care about me, right? I think the things I'm doing in creating these build packs are pretty indicative of what I think a sizable number of build pack authors would want to do, especially again if they're writing their build packs in Bash, which I think we've seen is common.
I think this first one you linked at least wouldn't need to change at all, right? Because you only need to use the file descriptor return syntax when you're trying to set environment variables.
And actually,
sorry, say it again.
Like everything you're doing in this first profile script would work if it was an exec-D script. We don't have a good word for this. It's like exec-D what? It's an exec-D-er.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to like experiment with moving them over. Like, I don't know if there's, there's so many funny things about profile D. Like the order they run in is like technically non-deterministic, I think. Like don't set -E because you don't know if something else is gonna like not honor that and then screw the whole thing up. So there's just a bunch of little stuff like that I've learned over the years that I don't know how it translates,
So
I think
all
some of
that
those
gets better. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say the same thing. I think Steven's going to say, like, you wouldn't have to worry about setting -E and stuff like that.
Sorry. I was just going to say, in fact, the file you've written here is, you didn't need to put a shebang at the top with the env bash in the profile case, but that turns it into something that's executable, and the file appears to be executable in Git, and so it wouldn't just all work. I think like you've inadvertently written this as an exec-D.
Well, doesn't he have to set the SSH port as a thing that is written to file descriptor 3 since he wants to set that? Or is that, no, that's only used as a local bar.
I think the only issue that, like for me, most of my profile D scripts I was able to convert to exec-D fairly quickly. The only issue I had was like the exporting of environment variables. I don't know why file descriptor 3 was chosen as opposed to something else.
It's because we wanted to preserve log output. And so standard error and standard in are still connected to logs, so that because it's just kind of part of your running process, we didn't want to hide, log output that would have to happen first. So we kept, 1 and 2 connected to out error and said, okay, we'll open 3, and 3 is going to be where environment variables go. Yeah.
As opposed to just passing in the output as an argument to the script. Like these are
giving it a file.
Yeah, or you can just pass in the file, like the descriptor as the, I don't know, like you could just pass in the argument where you're supposed to write to the script as the only argument.
Yeah, you could pass a file in, or you could pass a name pipe in, or you could yeah, we just said file descriptor 3 is pretty easy in most languages. I don't know.
I feel like there's an argument to be made that we should have taken output and standard out and then standard errors for logs. So that's sort of how small sharp Linux tools work a lot. Like standard out is supposed to be the output that then you can pipe to other things, and standard errors where you just write information. But I feel like nobody does that in practice, and everyone would log to standard out and then it would all break.
Right. Because we're gonna, especially when these are bash scripts, you're gonna run a lot of tools that you don't know if they output things to standard out, and it could easily log things into that list of environment variables that would work.
I mean, you could say this, I don't know if your tools could randomly output to the file descriptor 3, but if you explicitly pass in the output file or something, and then you use that, at least it's more explicit than using.
We did this. We ended up doing this on the Windows. At first, we're like, Windows will also write to file descriptor 3. Turns out that sentence was nonsensical in the Windows case. So we're passing it the handle it's supposed to write to. We could instead pass like a path to a file. I think would make the most sense to people from like an intuition perspective. It's a bit slower to have to write things to disk when there's no reason to.
Pass a name pipe. It's
Yeah.
a file if you wanted to.
For the exec-d output, we don't describe what it has to be, but maybe when we said key, we meant value here in the spec. When we say basic string, does that mean it can't include M bars? Like if they will be interpreted or not interpreted? Or interpolated rather. Just looking at Joe's favorite example, which is
in the XID case, they're not interpolated. It's key equals value, but I think it's actually TOML key equals value format. It's not interpolated in the same way that profile D is not interpolated. So you can do the interpolation locally in your profile D script, but in both cases, you can't put a variable in the variable and then expect it to be interpolated later. So the behavior is the same as it was before. Does that make sense?
so it has the same interpolation characteristics as profile D.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different format, but it's the same. Interpolation is done in the same places, in the same ways. Joe, something you said a bit earlier was about the order. So the order for profile D is enforced as it's the layer order lexigraphically, and then it's the same ordering rule for the profile D scripts themselves. And I think XID has the same defined order as profile D does. So it shouldn't change the order they're executed in, just changes the directory name.
It's build pack execution order, then layer order. Just in case that wasn't clear.
Build pack layer, and then, but it's build pack execution order layer lexigraphically, and then profile D lexigraphically.
Yeah,
yeah.
Actually, I forgot that solves like 90% of my problems, actually 99 probably, because within the same build pack, I don't usually care. Like if there's a potential conflict between two of them, I can solve that. The problem is always like some other build pack or a profile D script, and I didn't know it was going to run first.
We do all the profiles in XX of each build pack before moving on to the next build pack. Is that right? We don't do all the profiles and then all the XX. That'd be an interesting case.
I
do all the profiles and all the
think we do
execs.
all the profiles and all the execs and all the profiles. And the reason we do that is because the profiles are part of one final giant bash command in the bash case. So we kind of need to do the exact stuff first, unless we wanted to write some crazy bash logic to run exects.
But that would, once we get rid of bash, it would all be okay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
and
could
wouldn't
reorder
change
them,
anything.
then we wouldn't have to do it the way we do now.
There might just be, it might be a little hiccup during the migration where somebody switches for a life cycle that continues to support bash from profile to exec. And that could change that could make their thing higher priority than other build pack things. Be something to think about.
So it sounds like we're all on board with killing bash. In my mind, there's a compromise option, which is we don't have a special implicit bash process type. That's really the default, but instead we take the things people already write, like profile scripts, keep a dependency on bash, but evaluate it slightly differently. Like basically have the launcher act as a wrapper around a profile script that it runs, and then it takes whatever changes it sees in the environment and sends them back. It'd be slightly different from how profiles work now, in that they wouldn't actually all be sourced in the same shell, but it sounds like that would actually solve a lot of the problems you're running into. I like that less.
Just, you mean,
than the other
yeah, I mean, they're not really, those aren't really problems. I'm just saying they're like things I've accommodated over the, I got grown accustomed to over the years, and I just didn't know what new implications I'd have to learn and stuff.
It can be
And,
problems
I mean,
in that one person's build pack who hasn't learned those customs can screw up everything else. Right?
Yeah, like set minus E. No, and again, it's not like I don't care about me. I just think that the things I'm doing are representative. So that's why I'm trying to suss all this out.
Something else that I like about getting rid of bash is I kind of get the feeling people are moving away from bash in different contexts. So on a Mac, if you install like latest, I don't know, whatever it is, you get
ZSH.
Yeah, Zish. On Ubuntu, they like Dash now more than bash. You get both in the Docker image, but they seem to think Dash is might be a better alternative.
Yeah, like I said, I don't actually care about bash. It's just, and Dash would align with, most of the Docker ecosystem probably. It's really just the user experience that I care about.
I think if we solve the environment substitution problem, and I don't know if we want to change the interface to explicitly pass the file to execd. But if we solve the environment substitution problem with direct equals true, I think that solves like 90% of my use cases why I use bash anyway.
I don't want to do the Kubernetes syntax though. This is weird.
I mean,
I'm offended.
It is a standard that people know about. We'll be
We didn't know about it.
Even Steven didn't know about it, is my metric.
Well, I've seen that syntax in other places. I just didn't realize Kate's would do that for args, but only the arg if the environment variables were specified as part of the thing. It didn't used to do that.
Yeah, it's like makefile does the same thing, right?
Yeah. But in other places in Kate's, when you're doing templating, there's some other places that use that parentheses notation.
sorry, can I, for my sake, can I get at a high level, how we feel about this convention just in general, right? Like there's plenty of other tools in in our space that do enforce like SH or something like that. I guess I've never really heard up till now. Do we want to follow that convention or we want to go against that convention because we don't like it?
Which convention?
So we're talking about removing bash, right, from as a default, but I do feel like maybe my experience SH, just regular, that's a default for a lot of other tooling, right? Just the idea that you have an executable binary that's by default and you don't have to opt into anything. That's the convention.
Do you mean like there's a convention in some tools where if you provide a command string as opposed to a command in args, that'll get, like in Docker, if you do like an entry point that's a long string instead of the array, it'll run bin sh-c that thing automatically for you. And then sh is like tries to be this POSIX compliant shell that doesn't, like, all the shells are supposed to kind of behave somewhat similar if they're executed through that link. You're talking about that kind of convention?
Yes, that you don't have to specify your executable or your shell. It is implicit. It's implicitly defined.
I think we're talking about a model where there is no shell, right? The
Yeah.
operating system executes the thing directly. And so that, and if you want to have a shell there, you have to, kind of explicitly specify it. And so like, I think that is part of the decision is like, should we keep a mode where it implicitly puts bin sh-c somewhere, right? But it's complicated because we have these profile scripts that should kind of match that shell that are currently not in POSIX shell, they're in -4 shell specifically. And they all have to get sourced by the shell first before the commands run. And so part of wanting to drop it is that interface means that bash is mandatory separately from that. I don't know, maybe I'm not answering your question, sorry.
I think there's like two cases to think about. The one we've been focusing on is like a build pack contributes a process type. And so in some ways it's telling you what it wants to run no matter what. It's like a case where someone is saying what they want the process to be, but it's just about whether we stick bash in front of it or not by default. But there is another case when like users are running a command themselves and not using one of the built-in processes. And then what do we want the default to be in that case? Do we want users to have to specify the shell as well if they want a shell? Does that distinction at all get to the point you're making, Anthony? No.
No, it was good. Actually, it was a good distinction because I wasn't aware that there were sort of two cases we're talking about here.
So I think how Docker solves that is that if you leave your entry point as a blank array, it automatically prefixes it with a thing bin/sh. And I think, as far as I know, what I think Docker themselves don't recommend the string form of entry point. Like they tell you to use the array form first and then use the string one, because the string one has some other weird issues, like you can't, any extra arguments you specify via the command line are dropped, which is again not intuitive.
This was our problem that led us to our weird, we'll just evaluate the arguments and stick them in a script for you solution.
I think if Docker could make this decision again today, I don't think they would choose to do any of the bin sh. I think they would take the approach Kate's took, which is say, here's your command, here are your args, fill them out. I don't think they would call them entry pointing command. To me, that feels like it's a historical decision that maybe made a lot of sense at the time, but I wouldn't
I mean, entry point and command still makes sense. Entry point is the thing you always want to run, and command is the optional stuff that gets in there if you don't specify anything.
Yeah, but that wouldn't it make
Kate's
sense to call
renamed
that?
them to command and args, which I think
Yes.
makes more sense.
I mean, yeah,
Is your image kind of your command or your entry point kind of your command?
the other weird thing is that all of this interpolation we do and the fact that profile D is not executed is not documented in the spec. So you find this by experience and not through documentation, which is another, like it hits you when someone's using your build pack, tries these random things, and then they come back to you and tell you, hey, this thing doesn't work. And then you have to go look into the launcher code to figure out what's happening. Which also isn't great.
What specifically wasn't documented?
Like how this interpolation works, where it gets rid of quotes or
Oh yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's in an RFC, but it's not on the spec.
There's probably some nod to it in the spec, I swear. Like, but maybe at the time we weren't as good about capturing everything. I'll look for it. We probably just did a bad job describing it, is what I'm guessing happened. That it's in there, but you would never know that is what it's trying to tell you.
I don't know if it's worth documenting if we're going to replace it, because then people might start
Yeah.
depending on it more. In the interest of time, because we only got 13 minutes left, how does everybody feel about moving on to a curious case of detect? Do we want to keep talking about this? Sam, I think these are both your things you brought up, so I'm looking at you.
I've documented it in the discussion, so just in case we don't get enough time. But here it is. The case is described there. It's so it starts off with 3 build packs. You have a build pack that's a generic system that provides like generic system packages. You have a build pack that provides code distributions and then sets some co-environment variables. And then you have a Go mod build pack that looks at the Go mod file and like requests a specific version of Go or does some other things with Go mod. Now, the provision and requirements for each of them are also noted in that discussion. So the system package manager, for example, provides system packages. Go provides Go and requires, like it can request system packages with different versions of Go. Let's say it supports 1.14, 1.15, and 1.16. And Go mod just reads the Go requires in Go mod and requests that from the Go build pack. And currently there is no way for such a system to communicate and exist. That's sort of the issue. Now, these problems go away if your Go mod build pack is directly aware of the system build pack and it's requesting packages from there directly, or if your Go build pack itself provides the Go binaries in the build process rather than requesting it from a system package manager. But then you lose the flexibility of having a generic package manager, which I guess you'll get with something like stack packs, and having like these shim distribution providers, like something that provides Python or Go specifically and configures some extra environment variables for them before being required by some other downstream build pack like pip or Go mod.
Is the kind of place where it falls apart because either the first 2 build packs here could provide Go and you don't know which one is providing which one in what version?
It's because where it falls apart is that you can't ask, like the Go build pack will never be able to request the current system packages, because it will only get to know about them during the build process. And by the time it's gotten to its build process, the system package manager would have already installed everything. So there's no way for the Go build pack to request the correct packages it wants based on the requirements from the Go mod build pack.
Why wouldn't the Go mod build, in this particular case, why wouldn't the Go mod build pack just request the packages that it needs directly?
Yeah, so the issue there was, like, let's say you have a Go mod build pack from something like Paketo, which doesn't need to know about, like, doesn't need to depend on a specific system package manager. Like, the Go mod build pack just requires Go, and you could have that Go mod build pack running on like RHEL, Ubuntu, or whatever. You can have like a star stack Go mod build pack. But by introducing a direct dependency on a system package manager, you've now restricted that Go mod build pack, which was previously, like, it just cares about Go being present, not about Go being provided from a system package manager.
Sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding. Is the idea that Go mod build pack needs additional packages because it's installing Go modules that need additional packages?
Good idea. I'm gonna jump in and try to explain, just make sure I'm understanding it, and you can tell me if I'm getting it, Sam. It's like a Go mod build pack wants Go.
Yeah.
The way the system is set up, it's like they would like the system package version of Go, but you don't want the Go mod build pack to directly declare that, because then it couldn't work with other providers. So it's basically like a proxy build pack that looks for the request for Go and then asks for the system package.
Yeah. So like the Go mod build pack doesn't care where the specified version of Go is installed from. It just requires that specified version of Go. And then if you directly request like Go 1.16 from the system package manager, you'll now introduce this direct dependency on apt or rel, like yum or like some other thing where it doesn't need to be.
I think the way we would normally, this gets weird with stack packs and mix-ins in particular, right? If this was just one regular build pack providing a dependency, like you would just ask, you just use the same name, right? And you wouldn't need this sort of translator build pack that takes Go and turns it into, I think what in a stack pack world would be like a Go mix-in requirement, right? Like what, I guess in the current system, the only thing you could do now is have the Go mod build pack say that it either requires Go or it requires a Go mix-in. So you can have two alternative plans.
Yeah.
Usually, sorry.
I mean, that's not great, but I guess you could do that. You could either directly hard code like so let's say you add another system package manager. So let's say apart from Ubuntu, let's say in the future we have a RHEL stack, and that has a different concept of mix-ins. So now you'll have three plans, one where it requests it using yum, one where it's requesting it using apt, and one where it's requesting it just requesting Go, for example. So that's why I wanted this proxy build pack. So like, if you're on any of these stacks, the proxy build pack is the one responsible for providing Go, and the Go mod window, the Go mod build pack can just be reused across everything.
In a way, stack packs introduced this problem, because before we said that all base images, therefore operating system packages, had to be rebasable, LTS, ABI compatible bits. And so you'd never really want Go from your operating system, because it would be Go from 2018 with some security patches backported to it, right? It's not really what you want to build your application with, most likely. Although there are arguments for like, I shouldn't speak for every app in the world, right? But in general, people didn't want to do that. Now with stack packs, you really might want to get your Go from an RPM distribution, right? That the stack pack's going to install. But I wonder if stat packs are going to be a lot less performant. They're going to break rebase. Like it's never going to be preferable to me to use stack packs over a build pack that installs the binary. So I wonder if this is still, if this limitation is actually a good thing in the end. It discourages, it makes build pack authors, write build packs that work on top of the API for in places where you have that kind of application level dependency, and relegates operating system dependencies to a separate thing that's like LTSC libraries, but maybe more of them than you have right now. That makes sense.
You like, instead of, let's say, stack packs, you imagine something like Conda, which only really has a dependency on libc, and it can provide everything else in the a lot of different things on top. So let's say you replace that system package manager with Conda for a second, and then you're requesting Go using Conda. That would still be a valid use case, and it works. And
yeah, I think you want this to be analogous to the case that you made earlier with, it was like node packages or something, and that example felt, or like it felt like there was a real limitation there, if that makes sense. It's just this example with the system packages, I kind of don't want to solve this this example version of it, if that makes sense. Especially
is the limitation because you have 3 build packs that want to pass information back and forth, and basically there's sequential dependency order, but the detects are run in parallel? Am I understanding that correct?
It's the fact that they want to pass information together, and also during the build step they have to be in that specific order. So currently we couple the order of the detect step with the order of the build step, which makes sense for almost all of the cases except for a few.
In my mind, part of the problem here, if we take the Conda example instead, is about a build pack expressing that it could install many things. So it's like, you could say, oh, my Conda build pack provides Go. Like, it can. And then my Go mod build pack requires Go. And you don't need a middleman. But the problem is that you want to list like literally every single thing a person could install with Conda? Probably not. And then also the way the build plan works, you can't say I can install any of X. You have to say I can install exactly this set of things or exactly that set of things. You'd have a combinatorial explosion that would make it impossible.
I thought about a few alternatives to solve this. None of them are good. One was like, I think one was the filter expression that we were talking about. The other one was having like a resolve stage that runs after the detect stage, which runs in the opposite order from the build order. So the one that's getting built at the end would resolve it at the beginning and then pass information forward and make modifications to the build plan. So that by the time it comes to building it, it has all the information it needs. So it's like a 2-pass system. And the last option was having something run before the detect stage that can modify either like environment variables or like a version of the application directory, which then the detect API runs on.
Maybe capture those in the discussion thing, because we're out of time.
I worry that a resolve would really slow down detection, because now instead of running detect for every build pack once and figuring out what groups of things can work together, you have to go back and rerun them for every plan. I think because we do it so efficiently, it's not obvious to people like how many permutations of Buildpacks we are attempting to figure out if they would work before we give a group the thumbs up.
Well, you're basically implementing a resolver at that point, right?
I still think there's some hack where we can provide information and provides that conditionally changes the build plan, even though they're all output statically and at the same time, you can apply additional requires through the provides API. But I'd have to think about what that would look like in this case. We should call time though. Let's pick this back up. I think we have a thing scheduled for tomorrow, like a demo, but we can pick this back up either second half tomorrow or Wednesday. Thanks, everyone.